My beloved child, stop for a moment, because what you are about to hear is not simply a story about a painting. It is a story about a moment that was never meant to be explained with ordinary words. Somewhere inside a quiet studio, beneath a soft light, a world-popular artist stood before a completely blank canvas and did something that even the artist could not fully explain afterward. There was no grand announcement. No crowd was waiting outside. No dramatic music was playing. There was only an empty canvas, a brush, a few carefully chosen colors, and a feeling that had been growing silently for a very long time. Then the first stroke appeared. And here is where this story becomes extraordinary. The painting was not created to show a beautiful landscape, a famous face, a luxurious place, or an impressive scene. It began with something much more personal. The artist painted a small window surrounded by darkness, but through that window came a single beam of warm light. At first, anyone looking at it might have thought it was simply an artistic choice. But the artist stopped after that first section and stared at it for several minutes. Then another detail was added. A small empty chair. Then a table. Then a single flower placed beside the chair. Nothing appeared accidental. Every object seemed to be waiting for someone. Every empty space seemed to be saying something without making a sound. The artist continued painting slowly, almost as though the canvas was revealing the picture instead of the artist creating it. And then came the detail that changed everything. In the corner of the painting, almost hidden beneath layers of color, the artist painted a tiny handwritten message. It was so small that most people would never notice it immediately. The message was not a name. It was not a date. It was not a signature. It was a sentence that sounded almost impossible to understand unless you had experienced a certain kind of loneliness yourself. The message said that some people can be absent from your sight and still remain present in your heart. The artist stepped away from the canvas. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the artist looked at the empty chair and became completely still. That is the moment you need to remember, because the painting was about to become something much bigger than art. The artist had started with an empty canvas, but somehow the final image began to feel like a memory. Not a memory belonging to one person, but a memory that could belong to anyone who had ever waited for someone, missed someone, loved someone quietly, or wondered whether their presence had ever truly mattered. And that is why this painting feels different. It does not demand attention by being loud. It captures attention by being painfully quiet. You look at the window and wonder who is outside. You look at the chair and wonder who was supposed to sit there. You look at the flower and wonder why someone cared enough to leave it behind. Then you notice the light, and suddenly the entire painting changes. Because the artist did not paint a room that was completely empty. The artist painted a room that was waiting. That distinction is everything. An empty room can mean the story is over. A waiting room means something may still happen. And the artist knew exactly what that feeling meant. That is why the next part of the painting was created with almost unbelievable patience. The artist added a second shadow near the window. Not a person. Not a face. Just the soft suggestion of someone standing beyond the frame. It was so subtle that viewers could interpret it in different ways. Some saw a returning loved one. Some saw the artist's younger self. Some saw a person who had disappeared from their life. Others saw themselves. But the artist gave no explanation. Instead, the artist simply continued painting. And every new detail made the original question stronger. Who was this painting really for? Was it for someone from the artist's past? Was it for someone the artist had never met? Or was it for the person who would eventually stand in front of the finished canvas and suddenly recognize a feeling they had never been able to describe? The most surprising part is that the artist reportedly kept returning to the same canvas after everyone else believed it was finished. One morning, another color was added. Another evening, a tiny line was changed. A small portion of the light was made warmer. The chair was moved slightly. The flower was painted again. Why? Because the artist was not trying to make the painting perfect. The artist was trying to make the feeling honest. And there is a huge difference between those two things. Perfection can impress people for a moment. Honesty can stay inside someone's heart for years. That is why this painting became so powerful. It did not try to tell the viewer what to feel. It simply created enough space for the viewer to remember something of their own. Perhaps someone you once loved. Perhaps someone you once trusted. Perhaps someone who used to sit beside you and listen when you had nothing important to say. Perhaps a person who left before you were ready. Perhaps someone who is still part of your life but no longer feels as close as they once did. Or perhaps there is someone you never got the chance to meet, someone whose presence you imagined more times than you can count. The painting does not answer these questions. It makes them. And that is precisely why people cannot look away. But there is another detail hidden inside this painting, and this is where the story becomes even more emotional. If you look closely at the bottom corner, beneath the soft light and near the edge of the table, there is a second image hidden underneath the visible painting. The artist had originally painted something completely different there. A road leading toward a distant horizon. A road with no people, no buildings, and no destination clearly marked. It was later covered by the final image, but traces of it remained beneath the surface. That discovery changed the way people understood the entire artwork. The road suggested movement. The final painting suggested waiting. Together, they created a message that felt almost like a conversation between two different moments of life. One part said, "I have been searching." The other part quietly answered, "You have arrived." And suddenly the empty chair did not feel lonely anymore. It felt prepared. The window did not feel like a barrier. It felt like an opening. The flower did not feel forgotten. It felt deliberately placed. Even the darkness around the room did not feel hopeless. It made the light more meaningful. This is what makes truly emotional art so powerful. It can take the same things we see every day and rearrange them until we recognize our own life inside them. The artist understood that. Perhaps that is why the painting contains almost no obvious explanation. There are no dramatic words across the canvas. There is no giant symbol telling you exactly what happened. Instead, there are tiny clues. The chair. The window. The flower. The light. The hidden road. And that almost invisible shadow. Each one asks a question. Each one pulls you deeper. Each one seems to say, "Look again." And when you look again, you notice something you missed before. That is exactly how the artist wanted it. The painting was designed to reveal itself slowly. The first glance gives you beauty. The second glance gives you curiosity. The third glance gives you emotion. But the fourth glance gives you something much more personal. It makes you think about your own unfinished stories. That is when the painting stops being someone else's creation and begins to feel like a mirror. Maybe you have had a moment when you wanted to tell someone something important but the right words never came. Maybe you have watched someone walk away while carrying a sentence you never said. Maybe you have smiled in front of others while privately remembering a person who once made ordinary days feel extraordinary. Maybe you have wondered whether someone from your past ever thinks about you. Maybe you have spent years believing that certain memories were meaningless, only to discover that they quietly shaped the person you became. The artist somehow placed all of those feelings into one room without painting a single recognizable face. That is a rare kind of creativity. And there is one more reason this particular artwork became so deeply touching. The artist did not paint the people who mattered. The artist painted their absence. Think about that. A face can tell you who someone is. An empty chair can make you wonder who they were to you. A portrait gives you an answer. An empty space gives you a question. And sometimes a question stays with the heart much longer than an answer. That is why people began standing in front of the painting for much longer than expected. Some would enter the room, glance at it, walk away, and then return. Others would stare at the chair first. Some would look directly at the window. Some would immediately search for the hidden message. But eventually, almost everyone noticed the same thing. The painting seemed to change depending on what they were carrying inside themselves. If someone was happy, the warm light looked comforting. If someone was missing somebody, the chair looked painfully familiar. If someone was beginning a new chapter, the window looked hopeful. If someone had been waiting for a second chance, the road beneath the painting suddenly became important. The artwork had not changed. The viewer had changed. And that may be the most beautiful secret hidden inside the entire creation. Sometimes art does not reveal the artist to us. Sometimes it reveals us to ourselves. The artist had simply created the space. The viewer brought the memories. The viewer brought the questions. The viewer brought the unfinished sentences. And the canvas quietly held them all. That is why the painting became so much more than a beautiful object. It became a place where people could recognize emotions they had forgotten how to name. Yet the artist still had one final detail to add. And this final detail was not placed in the center. It was not placed near the window. It was not placed on the table. It was painted on the back of the canvas, where nobody would see it unless the artwork was turned around. A few words. Almost hidden. Almost private. And those words changed the entire meaning of the painting. The message on the back was simple, but its meaning was enormous. It was written as though the artist were speaking to one person who might someday need to hear it. The message carried an idea that could make someone stop and rethink every moment they had ever considered insignificant. It suggested that the moments we call ordinary may become the memories we treasure most. The quiet conversation. The unexpected smile. The hand resting beside yours. The familiar voice saying your name. The ordinary afternoon that seemed like nothing at the time. The person sitting across from you while neither of you said anything important. We often imagine that the most important moments in life will arrive with music, celebration, and certainty. But sometimes the moments that change us are almost invisible while they are happening. We understand their value only later. That is what the artist wanted this painting to remember. Not fame. Not success. Not applause. Not the public image of a world-popular artist. Something much simpler. Something human. The artist wanted to preserve the feeling of being seen by someone when you did not feel worthy of being noticed. The feeling of being remembered when you assumed everyone had forgotten. The feeling of receiving kindness at the exact moment you had stopped expecting it. And this is where the painting's empty chair becomes almost breathtaking. The chair represents the place reserved for someone whose importance cannot be measured by their physical presence. It is a reminder that some people leave behind more than memories. They leave behind habits, phrases, songs, places, routines, and little pieces of themselves that continue living inside us. You may walk through a room and suddenly remember how someone used to sit there. You may hear a certain melody and instantly return to another year. You may see a particular color and remember a face. You may pass a familiar place and feel an emotion before you even understand why. That is how memory works. It does not always knock on the door. Sometimes it simply appears. The artist understood that perfectly. So instead of painting a dramatic reunion, the artist painted the moment before one. The room is ready. The light is on. The flower is waiting. The chair is empty. The window is open. And somewhere beyond the frame, something remains possible. This is the point where the painting becomes almost impossible to ignore, because it does not tell you that someone is coming. It asks you to imagine what it would mean if they did. It makes you feel the weight of a moment that has not happened yet. And that is one of the strongest emotional experiences a piece of art can create. It places you between memory and possibility. You are no longer simply looking at a painting. You are standing inside a question. What if the person you thought had forgotten you still remembers? What if the chapter you believed was finished was simply paused? What if the love you thought disappeared became a quiet part of who you are? What if the person you have been waiting to forgive is actually yourself? What if the empty chair is not waiting for someone else at all? What if it is waiting for the version of you that you left behind? That final possibility is what makes the painting so powerful. Because perhaps the artist was never painting about another person. Perhaps the artist was painting about returning to yourself. The road beneath the surface could represent everything you have survived emotionally. The window could represent the future. The chair could represent your own place in your life. The flower could represent the part of you that continued to grow even when nobody noticed. And the light could represent the simple truth that even after a long period of uncertainty, there can still be warmth waiting for you. Suddenly, the painting feels completely different. It is not a picture of someone being left behind. It is a picture of someone discovering that they were never truly empty. They were simply waiting to understand their own story. And perhaps that is why the artist refused to give a single official explanation. The artist knew that the moment the meaning becomes fixed, the painting becomes smaller. But when the meaning remains open, every viewer can enter it. One person sees a lost love. Another sees a family member. Another sees a childhood memory. Another sees a dream they abandoned years ago. Another sees their own future. All of them can be right. Because the painting was never really about one person. It was about the universal feeling of carrying something precious inside you that words cannot fully explain. And then something unexpected happened when the artist finally considered the painting complete. Instead of placing a grand signature in the usual place, the artist made the signature extremely small. Almost invisible. Why? Because the artist did not want the name to become more important than the message. The artist wanted the viewer to remember the feeling before remembering who painted it. That decision says more about the artwork than any public statement could. It tells us that the creator understood one of the most beautiful truths about meaningful art. The greatest creation is not always the one that makes people say, "What a talented artist." Sometimes it is the one that makes someone quietly whisper, "That reminds me of someone." And that is exactly what happened. People did not simply admire the painting. They began telling their own stories. Some remembered someone they had not thought about in years. Some remembered a place they had left behind. Some remembered a dream they once believed was too late to pursue. Some simply stood there in silence because the painting had touched a part of them they had kept hidden even from themselves. And there was one reaction that appeared again and again. People would look at the empty chair and then at the light, and their expression would change. They seemed to understand something without anyone explaining it. The painting was saying that absence is not always the end of a story. Sometimes absence is simply the space where meaning becomes visible. Sometimes you only understand how much someone mattered after they are no longer beside you. Sometimes you only realize how strong you were after you look back at everything you quietly carried. Sometimes you only appreciate peace after experiencing years of noise. And sometimes you only recognize the beauty of your life when you stop waiting for it to look like somebody else's. Then came the detail that made the entire story feel like a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Remember the tiny flower beside the chair. At first, it seems like the smallest object in the entire composition. But according to the concept behind the artwork, that flower was deliberately painted again and again until the artist finally found the exact shape and shade that felt right. Why would an artist spend so much time on something so small? Because the flower was not meant to represent beauty alone. It represented remembrance. It represented the fact that something delicate can survive inside a place that has experienced change. The flower does not demand attention. It simply remains. And perhaps that is what the artist wanted to say about certain feelings. They do not need to be announced to be real. They do not need to be explained to matter. They do not need an audience to have value. Some of the deepest emotions in life are completely private. You can carry them quietly for years. You can smile, work, grow, move forward, and build an entirely new life while a tiny memory continues to live somewhere inside you. That does not mean you are trapped in the past. It means the past helped create the person you are now. And the painting captures that idea beautifully. The window is not closed. The light is not fading. The road beneath the surface is still there. The chair is still waiting. The flower is still alive. Everything in the painting seems to say that your story can contain both remembrance and new beginnings at the same time. You do not have to erase what mattered to move forward. You do not have to pretend something never happened just because life changed. You can honor the memory and still continue. You can miss someone and still smile again. You can remember yesterday and still believe in tomorrow. You can carry love without carrying sadness. That is the emotional balance hidden inside this artwork. And if you look at the painting one final time, the first thing you notice may no longer be the darkness surrounding the room. You may notice the light. You may no longer see the chair as empty. You may see it as reserved. You may no longer see the flower as fragile. You may see it as resilient. You may no longer see the window as a barrier. You may see it as an invitation to look beyond what is immediately visible. And that transformation is exactly what makes the artwork unforgettable. The artist painted a room, but the viewer discovered a lifetime. The artist painted a chair, but the viewer remembered a person. The artist painted a flower, but the viewer remembered something worth protecting. The artist painted a window, but the viewer began thinking about what could still be possible. And the artist painted light, but the viewer realized that sometimes a tiny amount of warmth is enough to change the way an entire room feels.